All right, welcome back to Yahoo Finance on this Friday morning. Well, earlier this morning, we got those better than expected numbers for the June retail sales report, sales rising when most economists were looking for a decline in sales last month, up about 0.5%, even when you adjust for the revised numbers for the month of May, which showed that those sales fell more than previously reported. Let's talk a little bit more about the state of the retail industry right now and the retail recovery. Anjee Solanki joins us now, the National Retail Director for the U.S. over at Colliers. Anjee, thanks so much for jumping on this morning. So let's start with kind of how you guys are thinking about the rebound that we've seen in retail. And let's start with physical retailers. I mean, we've seen the department stores doing pretty well. I mean, off a low base, sure, but they've done okay. And we've talked a lot on the program about clothing. Apparel retailers have had a strong spring. Is this, in your view, just a bounce back, or is there something here as we get into the next phase of the recovery?
Yeah, thanks, Miles, for having me. So definitely, I would say that if we look at retail and where we are today, just ending in our Q2, we've actually seen 5.4 million square feet absorbed. So we're actually seeing store openings outpace store closings by that square footage. So we definitely believe that there is a trend. It's a positive trend. We're being somewhat cautious, of course. A lot of the movement that we're seeing is in, of course, markets that are outside of the kind of core CBD, as office is still kind of quiet. But nonetheless, we are very enthused and excited to see the trend. What we're really seeing right now, Miles, I would say, is that in terms of the rebound, we have seen an increase in our new store openings. So what I mean by that is grocers, service concepts like urgent care, One Medical, Carbon Health, they're expanding more and more throughout the U.S., including F&B.
So to be clear, Anjee, it's Julie here. So you're including that in the retail category, or you're saying those are moving into what had traditionally been retail spaces?
That's a great question, Julie. Actually, what we're seeing is this shift of non-traditional retail entering the retail market. The key reason is that most of these non-traditional retailers or service-oriented retailers want to be co-tenant with other retailers because of a couple of reasons. One, the frequency of visits increase when you actually bring these types of retailers into, or I should say non-traditional retailers. So when you're in a grocery anchored shopping center, and you have all these different mix of uses, what you're creating for the customer is convenience. When you create convenience, you're going to get that customer to continue to shop at a higher frequency, and also they end up spending a bit more money.
So we're seeing a shift in what retail looks like. At the same time, though, I was in Manhattan yesterday. You're in San Francisco. I'm sure you're experiencing this as well. Anecdotally, man, there are a lot of empty storefronts, right? So are the numbers matching what we are seeing anecdotally, and are things getting better?
That's also a great question. I think it's really market specific or location specific. So as you mentioned, San Francisco, I'm here right just a few blocks from Union Square. Although we have definitely seen a softening due to a variety of reasons, of course, that occurred in 2020, we are still seeing some movement. So retailers coming back in to identify space. So let's say they were off a location. So they weren't in a prime location within Union Square, maybe off a block or two. Now they have the ability, because there's space availability, to relocate. Now they're also getting a better rent deal, possibly, but those rent deals are mostly seen in the higher concessions. So whether it's higher tenant allowance or a slightly softer uptick in their rent profile, there is still that kind of partnership that we're still seeing between landlords and tenants. Because at the end of the day, the landlords are still looking to rent their spaces, and retailers they do know there will be a comeback as it relates to retail, especially in markets like Manhattan and Union Square. Now, one thing we have heard is that specifically, for example, in New York, a lot of the brands have actually decided to pop up their brand locations elsewhere outside of the city. For example, in the Hamptons, and every storefront there is pretty much occupied, and it's been a pretty high activity.
Does the Does the department store have a place in life after COVID?
I would say that it does, but it does need a refresh. They do need to reinvent themselves a little bit. I think it's, again, going back to it's a one-stop shop. It's convenient to go into a department store. You have a variety of different brands you can shop all at once versus going into the various single store formats. We're also starting to see within department stores kind of a slightly, shift in how they're engaging with their consumer. So whether that's through kind of a digital conversation with digital stations or more of an engagement through some sort of entertainment as it relates to having, runway showcases within their stores. So there's this kind of change and shift that they're trying to explore and evaluate, but we'll have to see how that turns out.
And then, finally, Anjee, and you talked about this a little bit in terms of, where a store is located and who you want to be located near. You guys had some a really interesting graphic in here about 40% of retailers think it's a bad idea to turn malls into fulfillment centers, which is, of course, every REIT investor's, best idea they have. And I'm just curious, sort of, how's that going to shake out? The money guys want them to all just be Amazon fulfillment centers, but you're actually selling product. It's pretty much the last thing it seems that you want, near your store.
Most definitely. Look, it's very simple. If you have a dark storefront and you have people coming and visiting and shopping, it's not that impactful. And therefore, what tends to happen is that people are going to just walk by, and to them, they see that as an empty storefront. So there is definitely a psychological play around that. But more importantly, when you really look at fulfillment within a, call it, mall project, most of the time, the physical footprint actually doesn't play into a fulfillment requirement, meaning ceiling heights may not be there. The physical footprint itself might not be appropriate. So it's essentially turn into a complete, tear down and rebuild. The other thing is parking impact as well. So again, when we look at retailers and landlords and shopping centers, it's really how do we create a very convenient and nimble, I should say, shopping journey in order to get that customer back into the shopping center.
All right, we'll leave it there. Anjee Solanki, National Retail Director for the U.S. over at Colliers. Really appreciate you jumping on this morning, taking some time, and I know we'll talk soon.